Many dramas of the general election was the SNP's overwhelming victory in Scotland. That big contingent of nationalist MPs is now flexing its muscles at Westminster, frustrating the government over issues including fox hunting and English votes for English laws. Among them is the SNP's former leader, Alex Salmond. When we met in Aberdeen, I asked him, does he accept the case for English MPs to make decisions about matters affecting only England in principle?
In principle, yes. I mean, in principle, I'm in favour of an English Parliament, and I'm in favour of an independent England. I mean, a lot of folks say that the country would find it difficult to manage and would have trouble handling their own affairs, but I'm a great advocate of the ability of the people of England and their elected representatives to make decisions for themselves. But you must do it in such a way which is not unfair to other representatives. And certainly the way the government have cooked it up is bordering on the ridiculous, as they seem to be recognising, which is why, of course, they've had to postpone it to the autumn as they try to get back to the drawing board and draw up something more sensible.
So what, in the Alex Salmond worldview, would a successful English votes for English laws proposal look like inside a UK Parliament, not an English Parliament?
Well, if you were doing it, well, I was going to say if you were doing it properly, you would have an English Parliament, because you have to have some sort of symmetry between what's happening in Northern Ireland, what's happening in Wales, what's happening in Scotland, and what's happening in England. There are 4 nations in these islands, and if you were to take the Prime Minister at his word, and this was an equal partnership, then each of these nations would have equality with each other, and that would mean an English Parliament.
So David Cameron is now trapped then. You know, he can't give you an English Parliament because that's independence.
We'll give the people of England an English Parliament. I'm advocating an English Parliament, not for myself, but for the people of England.
But he's a unionist, and it appears that for a unionist there is not an acceptable English votes for English laws compromise in your view.
Well, that's not true. I mean, an English Parliament is not independent. So you could have an English Parliament within a federation, yes, in a home rule situation. Well, home rule all round, as it was once called.
I'm interested in whether there could have been some kind of armistice between a unionist government in London and the SNP around home rule all round, but that has been removed from the table by the English votes for English laws proposal.
A wise government would have not have provoked the situation of Scotland. They would have come to terms with it. Mind you, the history of the UK, of course, is littered with governments, from Dublin to Delhi, who haven't conceded enough to restless nations.
And is that what you think is going on now? Do you think, in the words of one of your MSP colleagues this week, that a second referendum is now inevitable?
Oh, I think a second independence referendum is inevitable. The question, of course, is not the inevitability, it's the timing, and that is very much in the hands of Nicola Sturgeon.
Is what you regard as mistreatment of the Scotland Bill and the evil question, is that a significantly substantial issue to provoke a second referendum? This is going to be the buzz of the SNP conference later this year, I'm sure.
Well, the first is the sort of issue. I mean, I can see 3 issues which are moving things towards a second referendum on a timescale yet to be determined. One is the refusal to deliver the vow. The vow was about home rule, devil to the max, near federalism, to quote Gordon Brown. That has not been delivered, as yet at least, in the Scotland Bill, so that's an issue. The second issue is the one that's been cast up quite a lot, and that's the European issue. If you had a situation, a circumstance, where Scotland voted to stay in the European Union, the referendum, but was dragged out in the votes of the people of England, then that would be a material change in circumstance. And the third thing emerging, of course, comes out from the budget and the welfare bill, austerity. Which is, austerity. Instead of getting devil to the max, we're getting austerity to the max, and that divergent view of what's right in social terms between Scotland and England is another issue which is moving things towards another referendum.
What the Conservatives would say is, nonetheless, under the new settlement, the Scottish Parliament is going to have control over 40% of taxation policy, 60% of spending, and therefore, if the SNP wants to blunt at least the edge of austerity in Scotland, you will very soon have the powers to do that. You can raise tax thresholds, you can raise tax rates in Scotland, and you can sort of, as it were, use that to subsidise welfare payments in Scotland.
Okay, can I explain why that's not true? I mean, firstly, it's not true about the 40%. Why? Because that includes, for example, having half of VAT assigned to the Scottish Parliament. Now, having half of the proceeds of a tax assigned to you, you can't control the tax base or the rates. It's not.
But you can control income tax.
No, but it's not financial control. Well, even on income tax, of course, it's only partial. It's the bands, but it's not, for example...
You could raise the top rate.
Yeah, but it's not, for example, tax on earnings as opposed to tax on dividends. weekends. The tax base is also still under the control of Westminster. So even on income tax, it's a partial control. You know, people in Scotland, we're no daft. We've actually seen through George Osborne's clever wheeze of saying what we'll do is we'll chop £1 billion of social support in Scotland, hitting some of the poorest, most vulnerable people in the country. You know, hard-working, low-paid families, people with disabilities. We'll take £1 billion off them. We'll hand that over to the Scottish Parliament with no extra budget, and we'll say to you, make up that shortfall of £1 billion. You know, that is not financial control. That is allowing.
You could show an earnest of your sort of social instincts by raising taxes to blunt a bit of that.
I'm just coming to that. That is cutting people off at the knees and saying somebody else is going to take you to hospital. That is not. I mean, we've kind of seen through that. That is not an alternative to having real control. And there's a limit to what you can do out of other budgets, or even raising what little taxation control you have in terms of compensating for something worth £1 billion. That's why we've been fighting austerity tooth and nail, and that's why we were so incredibly disappointed when the Labour Party sat in their hands as opposed to joining with us and 6 other political parties in opposing that welfare bill when it came before the House of Commons.
But you mentioned the Labour Party. Given what the SNP has been saying about austerity and so forth, is it absolutely the case that Jeremy Corbyn would be your ideal leader of the Labour Party, the person that you could do business with?
Well, I've tried not to try and pick the leader of another political party. I mean, that's for the members and supporters of that political party to do. Therefore, I've expressed no preference as to who the Labour leader will be. I've merely said that, well, firstly, I think that Jerry Corbyn's a serious politician. I think this, treatment of him, this demonisation, I'm quite familiar with it, incidentally. That demonisation in the metropolitan press gives no idea as to, the substance that he has in terms of his. I mean, I've known him for many years. And that doesn't mean I agree with him on anything, incidentally. It just means he's a substantial politician. The one advantage with Jeremy Corbyn is that you would know where he stood on certain issues. I mean, you know absolutely that you could cooperate as an opposition against the welfare bill. I would know absolutely that when the Trident renewal vote, the proposal to waste £100 billion on a new generation of nuclear weapons comes up, you'd know exactly you had a means of cooperation. One of the reasons why
he would allow more effective opposition in the House of Commons, in your view?
For the same reason that he's having such success within the Labour Party, that whether people agree or disagree with him, at least you're absolutely certain of where he stands in the direction of leadership. That doesn't mean I agree with Jeremy Corbyn's politics across a range of things, but you're asking a question, would it be possible to cooperate? And in terms of that question, the answer is yes.
You've been a long-standing supporter of the EU and Scotland's place inside the EU. When you look at what's happening to Greece, and when you look at the way, in essence, German bankers are deciding austerity policies and imposing them on a sovereign country, do you have any qualms, any second thoughts, any shivers about that?
Well, qualms certainly, but not just German bankers. I mean, let's put responsibility where responsibility is due. I was going to say German finance ministers and German chancellors. Yes. And I'm a huge admirer of Angela Merkel. I think she's been an outstanding European politician over the last decade, obviously. But those admirers of the German Chancellor would have liked to have seen a bit more leadership in terms of pan-European direction. Yeah, I mean, I think the treatment of Greece has been a setback for the European cause.
Let's move a little bit further away to the question of Syria, which the Prime Minister regards as an existential threat to this country, and he clearly now wants new parliamentary authority for military action of a kind we haven't seen yet. Do you think the SNP needs to be consulted before that happens, and how would you vote in such a vote?
Well, Parliament has to be consulted. And the SNP haven't been consulted as date. I mean, I saw the Prime Minister say he was talking to opposition parties. Well, I can say he hasn't spoken to me, and I am the international spokesperson of the SNP. But Parliament would have to be consulted, and Parliament would have to be persuaded. And I've heard nothing yet from the Prime Minister that would persuade me there's an integrated strategy which would justify a bombing campaign. Syria is a four-way civil war at the present moment. It's hideously complicated. And saying it's a four-way civil war actually is to underestimate the complexities. Very difficult indeed to know exactly who to bomb and what effectiveness it's going to have. But the second area that makes me so suspicious of this, there's one of my parliamentary colleagues has a story in the Sunday Herald today, information from the Commons Library. He asked the question of the comparison of spending between the UK's participation in Libyan bombing, 2 or 3 years back, with what has been spent on reconstruction or the attempt to reconstruct that country. The answer is £320 million to participate in a bombing campaign and £25 million to try and help restore the country, which is one reason, perhaps, we have a failed state in Libya now. And if you were looking for a country connection with the Tunisian atrocity affecting so many British citizens, then it's with Libya, not Syria.
Before we finish, your old sparring partner, Donald Trump, is on the stump and doing rather well in the United States. What would a Trump presidency mean, do you think?
Certainly, it would be a great boon for the 24-hour news cycle. Of that, there is no question. I'm not going to interfere in American politics in the way that Donald Trump interferes in Scottish politics, except to say this, that there's a difference between name recognition and political support, and it may be before long that Donald Trump will come to understand the difference.
Alex Salmon, thank you very much. Quiet hiss of a blade going in between the ribs there. And the Labour Party seems to have gone to war with itself over the choice of its next leader. The surprise success in the race of the left-winger Jeremy Corbyn is causing major jitters in the other camps. And this morning's paper suggests all sorts of non-Labour people are flocking to back him. The Communist Party says that it's about transforming Labour from a bourgeois workers' party that serves capitalism into a workers' party that serves the working class to the cause of socialism. Mr. Corbyn is with me. Good morning. Would you agree with that quote? Is that what the campaign is really about?
What it's about is converting the Labour Party into much more of a social movement, and an awful lot of people have joined the party since the election. We've now got 250,000 members, probably 50,000 signed up as supporters. They all want to do something. They want to change society.
So do you think the party today has been too much of a bourgeois party?
It's been too close to big business. It's been too close to economic orthodoxy. It's been incapable of offering Labour voters and the majority of the electorate a real alternative, and that was the fundamental problem in the last general election.
Let's talk a little bit about what kind of changes we might see from a Corbyn Labour Party. I think you've said that the top rate of tax might not go up as high as 70p, but how far should it go up?
Well, I think we should keep the 50 pence rate, but I think it's more important to look at spending on the basis of tax income by not reducing corporation tax. Indeed, I would increase it slightly to pay for student fees, but also closing down the massive numbers of tax loopholes, tax havens, and tax evasion by a lot of companies. Companies that claim to be trading in Britain, but in reality place their headquarters in Switzerland and pay Swiss corporation tax, for example. There's a lot of areas to do things, so it's not all about income tax.
What about some kind of wealth tax?
Well, a wealth tax on massive incomes that are made, sort of windfall tax, as was done by Labour in 1997, is a prospect worth doing. But the reality is, it's not just about taxing, it's also about increasing the economy, therefore you increase tax income. So one of my suggestions is a national investment bank which will improve infrastructure and at the same time improve investment in manufacturing industry, particularly small scale and medium range manufacturing industry. We've missed a trick in Britain. We're good at inventing things, bad at developing things.
Let's look at the macro picture, if we may, for a moment. £1.5 trillion of national debt, still 80% of GDP and so forth. Despite all the austerity, we still have a massive, massive debt problem. Is that not a real serious problem overhanging all of politics in this country, something you just can't walk away from?
But the austerity process makes it worse because it lowers income, lowers wages, lowers income tax, increases demand on welfare because of the levels of poverty in Britain. And so it actually is a cycle of decline. Surely it's better to invest in an economy, to grow income and grow prosperity.
Sure, but to do what you want to do, you either have to sharply raise taxes to blunt the edge of what is now called austerity, or else you have to raise borrowing. And it still seems to a lot of people that raising borrowing just at the moment is too big a risk.
You're looking at £50 billion of uncollected tax. You're looking at massive evasion of tax. You're looking at an awful lot of strange money that comes in, particularly to London and the South East, that's invested in land banking and empty luxury homes. I think there are some areas there when we could bring in a lot of money through taxation income. But the issue has to be what kind of society we want to live in and what role of government is in achieving that.
What about the role of the state? Because in our lifetimes, as it were, the state in Britain has moved back massively from what it used to do, and big sections of the economy has just pulled back entirely through privatisation. Do you think the time is ripe for nationalisation, both of the railways but also of other things too?
The role of the state, of government, of the community is surely to provide people with some security in their lives, to provide them with a decent health service, free at the point of use, provide them with a welfare state that stops people falling into destitution. We are not doing that. We're making it worse. But also, where there are natural
utilities,
natural monopolies like Royal Mail, like the railways, it seems to me counterintuitive that we spend a great deal of money on investing in railway infrastructure, billions, and we then hand it over to train operating companies to run it. I think it is much better if we bring the railway system as a whole into public ownership. It's not some extreme position. It's supported on opinion polls by 60 to 70% of the electorate.
Does the same not automatically and logically apply to, for instance, the power industry?
Well, I think the idea that you can run a fair market in the energy supply system is a little odd. Your house and my house have one feeder cable going in for our electricity, one gas pipe going in for our gas supply, one telephone line for our telephone system. There's no competition there. There is a creation of a false market. I would be much happier if we had a regulated, publicly run service delivering energy supplies.
So renationalise energy, gas,
you can call it renationalise,
water.
you can call it public ownership, you can call it a better form of control of those industries, but at the moment, there's a great deal of money being made out of all of us by gas and electricity companies who are benefiting from the infrastructure investment that you and I, as taxpayers, have put in over the past 50 years.
So public ownership of the big monopolies would still be a Jeremy Corbyn position.
Of those,
Which reminds me slightly of the old days of Tony Benn, the alternative economic strategy and all of that. If I'd asked Tony Benn what his politics were and asked him about Marx, I think what he would have said is Marx was right about a lot of the economics and wrong on the politics. And his politics came from the English radical tradition, the Levellers and so forth. Is that by and large where you come from too?
Well, Marx obviously analysed what was happening in a quite brilliant way, and the philosophy around Marx is absolutely fascinating. Does it all apply now? Well, obviously philosophy applies at all times. Do we then take that as a way in which we ensure that people have reasonable security in their lives through public ownership of the major monopolies, then I think that is a fair point to look at. It's not unpopular with the public. We are, after all, subsidising the railway system to a massive degree. The nuclear power industry expects us to pay for their clean-up costs when they decommission nuclear power stations. The water industry are constantly sniping around wanting support for new infrastructure projects. If we're investing in infrastructure, then we, the public, should get the benefit of it.
Do you regard yourself as a Marxist?
That's a very interesting question, actually. I haven't thought about that for a long time. I haven't really read as much of Marx as I should have done. I've read quite a bit, but not that much. And I think Marx's transition of history and the analysis of how you go from feudalism to capitalism and move on to a different stage is fascinating. So we all owe something to it. Probably inside you, even you do.
Well, I remember Francis Wheen said we should regard Marx as a great Victorian novelist, a great observer of the scene, and I think I would probably go along with that.
Well, he was an observer rather than a doer, although towards the end of his life his family got quite involved in doing things, but he was essentially a fascinating figure who observed a great deal and from whom we can learn a great deal.
The politics of revolutionary parties, however, were catastrophic, weren't they?
Well, I'm not talking about the Labour Party being a revolutionary party. It certainly isn't. And what we're doing here is putting forward a view that the Labour Party has to offer a credible alternative, that it's true to the roots of the Labour Party. The roots of the Labour Party are essentially democratic, essentially socialist, essentially community. What we were offering for the past 5-10 years has been essentially austerity light, essentially cuts. Look, if Labour had won in May, and I wish we had won in May, we'd now be making cuts in local government expenditure. That would intensify the adult social care crisis. That isn't right.
There is a very sort of fundamental critique of your position by all the other candidates, by a lot of commentators, which simply says, hold on a minute, Ed Miliband was, in relative terms, to the left on the party, and he was overwhelmingly rejected across England. The Labour Party was seen as a welfarist party, not as a party for people who earned money, not as a party for small business people or entrepreneurs, and therefore the proposition by Jeremy Corbyn that to win in England you have to move further to the left is bonkers.
Well, it's a rather unfortunate use of words, actually. I think people should engage in a serious debate rather than those kind of words, but let's leave that on one side. I'm suggesting that we invest a great deal more in manufacturing industry, in high-tech industry, in developing those medium-sized enterprises which can produce that. I'm also suggesting that in the last election, 34% of the electorate didn't vote, that whilst we did put on votes in England, we obviously lost in Scotland and didn't do terribly well in Wales, but there are also a lot of people that ended up voting for UKIP because they couldn't see anything being offered by the major parties. I think it's a counsel of despair what they were doing. If we were offering to end austerity, to improve the life chances of young people particularly, because students are leaving university with massive debt and underemployment, if we're offering hope to people, that'd be something. What's interesting about these debates and this campaign is the numbers of young people that have got involved, excited by politics.
On your campaign in particular, what seems to have happened in the election is that the electorate in Scotland moved to the left, the electorate in England moved to the right. Isn't the logic, therefore, that the Labour Party cannot really retain a unity across Scotland and England? The case, as Tristram Hunt was making on that chair not that long ago, for an English Labour Party is now quite strong.
Well, the Labour Party in Scotland was way out of touch with the general ambit of a lot of Scottish public opinion on Trident, on austerity, on housing, on welfare issues. And I think Labour in Scotland is going to grow again. It'll rediscover essentially what its roots are. What the structure of the party is in the future, that's up to a lot of party members and a lot of debate to decide. I don't think leaders should lay down everything, lay down policies or structures. I think the job of a leader is actually to basically form some views, develop some opinions, and encourage the growth of ideas and democracy. We've got 250,000 members. They've all got ideas.
Are you preparing yourself now, mentally and internally, to become leader of the Labour Party?
Well, I'm preparing myself for another month of debates and hustings and meetings and so on. We just finished the 20th hustings yesterday. Yes, of course, I'm thinking ahead of what happens after September the 12th.
And do you think you're going to win?
Making no predictions. I have no idea what the result's going to be, but I do know this campaign has been absolutely fascinating. It's mobilised and excited and enthused a lot of young people. What's there not to like about young people turning up, being excited and involved in politics? You
have been a very eloquent and persistent rebel all your life. As leader of the Labour Party, you're going to face a bloodbath, aren't you?
Well, there were one or two people in the parliamentary Labour Party who were slightly reluctant to put their signature beside my nomination to become the candidate for leader. I'm grateful to them for doing it, actually. I really am, because they've ensured there is a democratic debate in the party. Listen...
But you're in this for real. You want to be leader, you want to be Prime Minister, you're not going to stand down or...
No. Of course we're in this for real, but I would say this. It's the first time the leader of the party has been elected on a one-person, one-vote outside of any parliamentary control except for the gatekeeping of the entry to the election itself. Surely that is something we should be pleased about. And MPs, I'm sure...
democratic moment.
What, frighteningly democratic, is that what you're telling me?
On the other hand, you do have this extraordinary position. We do know that there are, as it were, entries to the party who are voting for you on the right because they have said so openly. They've paid their £3 fee to vote for you, to support you, because they think it's going to destroy the Labour Party. And on the left, people from the old militant tendency, from the Communist Party coming in from that side. Are you not worried about the number of people who are not real Labour Party folk to their boots who are coming in to support your campaign?
I have said all along, from the very beginning, I only want people to register as Labour supporters if they are genuinely Labour supporters and they intend to stay for the longer course. Personally, I'd prefer it if all those supporters became party members, and maybe we rejigged the membership fee in order to make sure we got a larger membership, because surely the idea of joining a party just to vote in a leadership election is a bit limited. We should go a bit further than that.
So you reject, as it were, entryism to support your campaign?
The entryism that I see is lots of young people who are hitherto not very excited by politics coming in for the first time and saying, yeah, we can have a discussion. We can talk about our debts and our housing problems.
Very briefly on Europe. The left-wing anti-austerity party, Syriza, got absolutely clobbered by German bankers and the German financial system. What's your view of Europe now, in or out?
It's not that simple. What I'd say is this. the way that Greece has been treated is creating a humanitarian crisis. All that bailout to Greece has actually gone back to the banks. It hasn't gone to the Greek people. Europe is negotiating transatlantic trade and investment partnership, which it goes through will be devastating for us. I think us, Labour, should be now saying we want workers' protection across Europe, we want a European social chapter, we want opposition to treat it as part of the negotiations.
That is not the Europe that's on offer in any kind of referendum.
Rather than giving Cameron a free hand to do whatever he wants and then say we're going to support him. I think we've got to be part of the pressure.
Right. Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us. And now over to Sian for the news headlines.
Thank you. The former SNP leader Alex Salmond has told this programme his party would be able to cooperate with Labour under Jeremy Corbyn on a number of issues, including opposition to Trident and austerity. Mr Salmond, who's now an MP at Westminster, also said he believed Scotland was moving towards another referendum on independence.
I think a second independence referendum is inevitable. The question, of course, is not the inevitability, it's the timing, and that is very much in the hands of Nicola Sturgeon.